Well, it's his style of leadership. I think it's remarkable. In 7 months of war, I think it's worth reflecting, Bev, on the fact that Vladimir Putin has not visited his frontline positions once, whereas Volodymyr Zelensky, who has cultivated this charismatic, personal, almost intimate style of national leadership, has visited, for example, Bucha days after its liberation and where war crimes were discovered outside of Kiev. He's visited the front lines in other places. And it's worth remembering, Izium is still extremely close to the front lines. It's probably safe from most Russian artillery attacks, but nevertheless, it isn't without some risk for the head of government to visit, not least given how central Zelensky is to continuity of government and Ukraine's sense of nationhood at this point in time. So I think it's incredibly important, and it highlights just how complete and utter the Russian rout in Izium was. My own colleague from The Economist was there yesterday, and he described to me, as we write in our piece today, how there's a graveyard of military vehicles rusting all over the place in Izium. They were all given up without a fight. And I think Zelensky's visit really underscores that this is now completely in Ukraine's grasp.
And that is such an important point you make about what it tells us about the morale on both sides, which we always understood that Ukraine has something so significant to fight for. But what does it say about the Russian side and whether they have any capacity to regroup?
Well, the Russian collapse in Kharkiv in the northeast was a symptom. And it was a symptom of Russia's military problems, but in particular, its manpower problems. They were diverting forces to the south in Kherson province, where they expected the bigger offensive was unfolding. And indeed, it was the bigger offensive. It remains the bigger offensive. But what they didn't calculate was that Ukraine had enough in the tank for a second front that took the Russians by surprise. And the point about regrouping, the reason that's relevant is because Russia has fairly minimal reserves at this point, and so it has to make some difficult choices. Does it shore up its positions in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, which is notionally the stated objective of its campaign, or does it reinforce the lines in Kherson province, where Ukraine is steadily grinding down those Russian defenders in Kherson city on the west bank of the Dnieper River? And until Russia sorts out its manpower problems, among others, that problem, that dilemma is going to persist.
Yeah. You know, Putin does seem to be unbowed about what he has done, the action he has taken. He's now going to be meeting with China's President Xi in the coming hours. What are we likely to see? You know, we know Ukraine has got such tangible support. Is Russia likely to get any kind of support from China?
Well, Russia has asked China for military support in previous months. A few months ago, we saw quite a long shopping list go out to the Chinese. But basically, nothing has happened. I think that's really important. What you're going to see coming out of this visit is bromides, words of solidarity. The Chinese will probably express sympathy with NATO, with Russia's opposition to NATO expansion. They will express solidarity with Russia over what they see as unjust Western sanctions and Western arrogance. But really, when it comes down to it, are you going to see Chinese military hardware, artillery ammunition, drones, medical kit, guns, air defense systems go to the Russians? And I think the answer is no. The Chinese understand that this invasion is going wrong, it's not going very well, and they don't want to be associated with it. This is why the Russians are being forced to buy Iranian drones. It's why they're going to North Korea for artillery ammunition. Ultimately, Russia just doesn't have very many dependable friends, and Ukraine has an awful lot, including all 30 NATO allies and others like Australia.
You know, the nuclear option is again being raised, and concerns that because of the sort of pressure Putin is under, that he might start considering that. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are we can't discount this possibility, particularly if Putin feels conventional defeat on the battlefield is a precursor to the unraveling of his own regime. That might allow him to activate Russia's nuclear doctrine, which specifies threats to the existence of the Russian Federation. But I think it remains relatively unlikely. And the reason I think that is because any use of nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, including which are those with a very low yield, perhaps a few kilotons or a fraction of a kiloton, it's not easy to see what they achieve. They wouldn't have a major battlefield effect. They wouldn't stop a Ukrainian offensive on the ground. And I think most of all, they would risk inducing the very outcome that Vladimir Putin has used nuclear weapons to avoid, which is intervention by NATO in this conflict. If nuclear weapons are used in anger for the first time since 1945, I think it would risk bringing about a Western intervention into this conflict. And for Vladimir Putin, that would worsen his predicament, not improve it.
Yeah. You know, we've talked about this as a potentially long, drawn-out conflict. With this new offensive, counter-offensive from Ukraine, has that changed the trajectory of this?
I think it might have done. Certainly, my sense is that the Russian lines outside of Kharkiv are still better defended, and you're not going to see them collapse in the same way. But what we have seen very clearly is that when things go right, when Ukraine hits with surprise, when Russia's lines are caught sleeping, when their command system breaks down, things can move and unravel very fast indeed. And so I wouldn't exclude the possibility that the sort of rout we have witnessed in the northeast, involving the loss of several brigades worth of military equipment, the loss of 6, 7, 8,000 square kilometers of territory, could happen in other places. I don't think it's the likeliest outcome, but I think it's possible. And I think the most important thing from the past week is not the physical liberation of territory, important as that is. It's the proof of concept. It shows that Russia can be dislodged, and it shows those who doubted it that Ukraine can advance and that the war is winnable. I don't think it'll happen in the next week or the next month, but I think it can happen next year with sufficient training and sufficient arms for the Ukrainians.
Indeed. Great to get your analysis, Shashank. Thanks so much.
Thank you.